All right, today we're tackling one of the biggest, most complicated topics you can imagine. Us. Yep, you and me. We're going to dive into this thing called social science to try and figure out all the hidden forces and invisible rules that basically shape everything we do. I mean, have you ever really stopped and wondered, why do we do the things we do? Like, why do we automatically stand in a line instead of just mobbing the counter? Or why do you get that sinking feeling in your stomach when you break some unspoken social rule? The ones that aren't actually written down anywhere? It turns out these aren't just random little quirks. They are the exact mysteries social science is trying to solve. And the place we find those answers? It's all under this huge, huge umbrella we call social science. And it's not just one thing, right? It's this giant collection of fields. You've got sociology, psychology, anthropology, economics. They're all different tools, all trying to piece together the giant puzzle of what makes us tick. Okay, so let's start with the big picture. What is this field that's trying to explain, well, pretty much everything about us? Well, at its very core, it's this. Social science is the scientific study of human society, and that word scientific is super important. This isn't just about opinions or guesses. It's a systematic, evidence-based way of looking at our social world, from how we first got started all the way to the complex stuff we deal with today. All right, now let's zoom in a bit. We're going to go from this massive idea of society and look at something a lot more personal, the invisible rules that guide our lives every single day. And pretty much all those rules are part of what we call culture. Now, a great way to think about culture is like it's the operating system for a society. It's the total package, right? It's our behaviors, our language, our values. It's all the stuff that gets passed down from one generation to the next that basically tells us how to function in the world. So these cultural rules, or norms as they're called, they're not all created equal. They actually exist in a kind of hierarchy. So at the very bottom, you've got folkways. These are just your everyday customs like saying please and thank you. Step it up a notch and you get to mores. These are a bit more serious, tied to morality. If you violate one of these, you're going to get some serious social disapproval. Then, of course, you have laws. These are the rules that are so important we've actually written them down and the state will enforce them. And then, at the very top of the pyramid, you have taboos. These are norms that are so deeply ingrained that just the thought of breaking them causes this extreme sense of disgust in most people. Okay, so we've looked at the external rules of society, but how do they get inside our heads? How do we internalize them? To figure that out, we have to take a little tour inward, into the human mind. And you really can't talk about the mind without talking about the one and only Sigmund Freud. His famous iceberg theory completely changed how we think about ourselves. He said, look, the conscious mind, the part you're aware of right now, that's just the tiny, tiny tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water. The real action, the vast majority of what drives us, our deep-seated instincts, our hidden desires, our repressed memories, it's all churning away under the surface in what he called the subconscious. Freud also had this idea that our personalities are built in these critical stages when we're kids. Each stage, he said, has a specific challenge. And if we have some kind of unresolved conflict during one of those stages, well, we can get stuck or fixated. And that fixation, according to him, could pop up later and shape our behavior as adults in all sorts of ways. But, our personalities aren't just about these hidden internal drives, right? What about all the things we learn from the world around us? How does our environment shape how we react to things? And that brings us to this incredibly powerful idea called classical conditioning. Now, you've probably heard of Pavlov's dogs, right? He trained them to salivate at the sound of a bell just by associating the bell with food. Well, it turns out this works on us too. The really famous, and let's be honest, pretty questionable, Little Albert experiment showed that you could teach a baby to be terrified of a harmless white rat just by pairing the sight of the rat with a loud, scary noise. It's a profound idea. Even our deepest emotional responses, like fear, can be learned. And of course, it's not just about emotional reactions. Our actual thinking abilities develop over time too. The psychologist Jean Piaget, he mapped this all out. His theory shows these distinct stages of cognitive development, starting from when we're babies in the sensory motor stage, just learning about the world by touching and tasting everything, all the way up to the formal operational stage, where we can finally think about complex, abstract ideas. All right, so we've been deep inside the individual mind. Now, let's pull the camera way, way back out again. Let's look at how social scientists try to explain society as a whole using these different big picture theories, kind of like different pairs of glasses. So here are two of the biggest lenses you can use. On one side, you've got functionalism. This theory sees society like a body, a living organism. Every single part, family, school, the economy, it all has a specific job, a function, to keep the whole system stable and running smoothly. Then, on the complete other side, you've got conflict theory. This view doesn't see a stable system at all. It sees an arena of constant struggle, where different groups are always competing for power and resources. And the most famous conflicts theorist, of course, is Karl Marx. For him, the main struggle, the engine of all history, was economic. It was this fundamental clash between the bourgeoisie, the people who owned the factories and all the wealth, and the proletariat, the working class who had nothing to sell but their own labor. Marx believed this constant conflict was what drove society to change. You can see a similar kind of contrast in this idea from the sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies, the big shift from what he called Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft. Think of Gemeinschaft as that tight-knit, community-focused life you'd find in a small rural village. It's personal, traditional, a real we feeling. Gesellschaft, on the other hand, is what you get in a big modern city. It's more impersonal, individualistic, and our relationships are often based on what's useful. It's a really powerful way to think about how our social connections have changed over time. So, what are these parts of society that functionalists and conflict theorists are always talking about? Well, we can think of them as the core building blocks of any society. We call them social institutions. Now, a social institution isn't necessarily a physical building. It's an established, organized pattern of behavior that's built to meet a really important social need. The big ones you hear about all the time are things like the family, education, religion, government, and the economy. They're the basic framework that organizes our lives. Let's take the family. It is a universal institution. You find it in every single society on Earth. But the way it's structured can look wildly different depending on where you are. It could be a nuclear family, a single-parent family, a blended family, or a huge extended family. The basic institution is universal, but its form is incredibly diverse. And it's the exact same story with government. It's the institution that's there to provide order and control. But that control can look very different, right? It can range from the absolute, total power you'd see in a totalitarian state, all the way down the spectrum to a direct democracy where the citizens themselves are in charge. So when you step back and look at all of this, what does it all add up to? Well, social science isn't just a big pile of facts. It's more like a toolkit. It gives us concepts like culture and theories like functionalism and ways of understanding these big institutions. It's basically a set of lenses we can use to make sense of the incredibly complex human world. And that really brings us to the most important part. Because now that you have these lenses, you can start using them. Seriously, think about your own life. How do the unwritten rules of your culture shape the things you do every single day without even thinking about it? When you look at the world, do you see a society that's mostly working together smoothly? Or do you see different groups in constant conflict? Social science gives you the tools. Now it's your turn to be the analyst.